We are dealing with the Conservative government here, and hadn't really thought it through has been a theme since about 2016.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Wolmar, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what are we covering today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. Now, regular listeners will know, both in the UK and around the world, that in earlier episodes of Calling All Stations, we've extensively covered the long-running industrial disputes in Britain's railway industry. And the last element of those long-running disputes was resolved in July of this year, shortly after the change of government in the UK and the election of the Labour Party, when there was a settlement reached between train drivers union ASLEF and the railway industry, and in effect the government acting as the controller of the railway industry, the franchised train companies predominantly operating in England. Since that settlement, there's been a huge amount of coverage of the deal that was made, all of it kind of reported by third parties. Very little has been said by the people who were actually involved in the negotiations. And at Calling All Stations, we thought it was right to correct that anomaly and have a witness to history speak about what really went on to bring the settlement and resolution of that dispute. So you, Christian, have secured an interview with Simon Weller, who is the Assistant General Secretary of the Train Drivers Union, ASLEF, which I think our listeners will find very interesting and informative about the settlement that was reached and the process that was gone through. And here's your interview.
So, Simon, thank you very much for talking to me. I was very keen to catch up with what's happening on the union side. We're kind of 4 months into a Labour government, but before we start on how you're dealing with the present government, just explain to me the last couple of years, the dispute, and how that dispute kind of went on and on and on, and why.
It was a long drag. It started off with the Conservative government being very clear that they wanted to tie any pay rise to above 2%, with inflation running at kind of north of 10% at the time, that it was coupled to a complete kind of bonfire of train drivers' terms and conditions across the whole country.
And what were the sort of things they were asking for?
They wanted things like so that trainees would be paying for their own training. They wanted to impose Sundays in the working week, or have commitment to that you are committed to work Sundays in the working week, over and above the 35-hour rosters our rosters. So it was a really wide-ranging thing, to the extent the earlier meetings that we had were all about walking times at Strawberry Hill. Strawberry Hill was
Explain that.
Well, they brought in specialists, and the DfT have a bee in their bonnet about walking times, and they think that drivers shouldn't be paid for walking about. They see this as unproductive time.
So to walking from the depot to the engine?
Yeah, or from the train to the coaches, or changing ends. When Philip Hammond was the Secretary of State for Transport, he was saying, why do drivers get paid for walking from one end of the train to the other? Which was, quite frankly, insane.
Was there ever any chance that this could be resolved by the Tories, or was it just they were setting conditions that they knew you would never agree to?
It seemed to be, in many areas, set up to fail. They were leaking their proposed plans to the Telegraph, to the Sun, before that we got copies of them.
Famously, they did that once. Yes.
And that caused mayhem. Then there were other times where we thought we had got close to a deal, maybe not everything, but maybe something we could have put to the members. And then suddenly it completely changed with all the areas that we had negotiated out, reinserted. And to be quite frank, the RDG representatives that we were dealing with...
The Rail Delivery Group.
Yes, the Rail Delivery Group representatives we were dealing with at the time looked a bit shifty, because if this had been imposed upon them by the government.
Who was actually sitting across the table from you?
We had Steve Montgomery of First Group and Andy Meadows, formerly of National Express.
So no ministers?
No, most definitely. We had one. Well, Mick Whelan, the General Secretary, had one meeting with Mark Harper. We had a couple of meetings with Hugh Merriman. Hugh Merriman, my dealings with him, he was a very approachable, and I kind of got him as pretty straight. And he, I think, wanted a resolution, but he was under instruction from elsewhere that a resolution was not to be forthcoming.
Right.
That was my reading of the situation.
Right. And presumably the sticking point was, I mean, you basically agreed the pay side. You were happy with the pay side?
No, there'd been no offer. Never been an offer on pay. Whenever we had the discussions, they wanted to talk about reform of the railway. The problem is they wanted to impose a one-size-fits-all, which that just wouldn't have worked with the types of companies. They have got different operating needs. They have already different terms and conditions. Some companies have Sundays in, some have some Sundays out, some have different training arrangements. They have different rostering arrangements. It's an absolute, having one size fits all doesn't work.
Right. So it needed to be with individual train operators, but you couldn't do that.
Yeah, the individual train operators have been clearly told that they could not negotiate this. This was to be done by the DFT.
Okay. So we get to the election, and had you been talking to the Labour Party beforehand at all, before the election?
Not specifically about the dispute, but they had indicated there was a willingness to. They'd been doing this publicly, saying that they wanted to have the grown-up conversations and resolve a lot of the outstanding disputes, whether it be the junior doctors, whether it be us.
Right. So you get in, and then what actually happens? How does this process kind of occur?
Well, they won the election. The Secretary of State was appointed or confirmed because Louise Haigh had already been the shadow Secretary of State for Transport. And a call was put in, said, can we set up a meeting with the DFT, which was with Alex Hines, again with Andy Meadows. And we met, I think, about 5 days after the election. There were 3 meetings. There was some time between the meetings while wording was finalised. It wasn't straightforward, but it was a lot easier.
So who were you meeting with? You were meeting again, not with ministers.
No, but with their representatives. It was Alex Hines, who's the head of the DFT, who knows his stuff. Andy Meadows is someone we've worked with in the past, who knows their stuff, really does understand the railway and what the railway needs, and also understanding the politics of where they've been allowed to negotiate. And where we've been allowed to.
So the Rail Delivery Group was no longer part of that?
No.
Right. So who Alex Hines was representing the DFT. So you were basically, it had shifted to the DFT from the owning groups and the Rail Delivery Group?
Yes.
Right. And
we had an agenda that was that they were pushing was more for the wider industry than perhaps for the interests of First Group or any of the other operators.
Right. And they had the power to impose or to negotiate a deal for everybody, for all the train operators.
They understood very quickly that trying to have a one-size-fits-all wasn't going to work.
Right.
So the plan was to deal with the outstanding 2022 and 2023, but they also wanted to resolve 2024, which we were in the midst of at the time. Anyway, so whilst this wasn't originally what we had balloted over, and this wasn't the dispute as such, because it was just 22, 23. If it gave everyone some security, it gave the railway some stability, we were happy to start discussing that as well. And I think that was a real important plank for the DfT and I think for the Treasury as well.
Okay, so explain to the mechanics of the deal you came to. This just was about pay.
So just keep it clean, keep it simple. We needed to get a resolution. It was in effect a pay cut because this would be 5 years of below inflation pay increases. Because we haven't, for a lot of our members there, they hadn't had a pay rise in 2019. We waived
since 2019.
Since 2019, so we waived the pay rise in 2020 and 21 because of the pandemic. It just wasn't. We were trying to keep the railway running, and no one had dealt with a global pandemic before. Right. So we'd waived a pay
some time ago. You'd done that already.
Right. But we'd done that already.
Right.
The mechanics was just keep it clean. Move the reform and productivity that they're looking for, and we realise that the railway in some areas needs some changes, and in other areas, a different type of change. That's really best done at that level by the people who've got the expertise in the operation in that area. So we put it to our company councils, which are the company negotiators who do pay and conditions.
Right. So the pay was about 15% over 3 years, was it?
It compounds to 15%, but it was 4.75, and 4.5.
Right.
Which are all significantly below the inflation we had faced for the period of the dispute.
Now, was there an agreement to discuss, or was any part of it, the deal you came to, about other terms and conditions other than pay?
Not individual terms and conditions. This was moved. There was an agreement that any discussion would be done at a company level. So when the operating companies, I'm not sure how best to describe them at the moment.
Yes, because they're not franchisees anymore.
No, they're not neither fish nor fowl. A lot of them. But to do it at a company level, and do it with the negotiators locally, and also do it with the operation. The people there who know what changes they need to make, and these are the discussions. But we made it very clear that if there's productivity, we want to share in that productivity. This is how we've operated for many years.
So there was no absolute commitment to sort out some of the issues that the Tories have been kind of hung up on. There's no ongoing commitment to.
We were always committed to talks. We were always committed to evolve. We've done that. That's how we've dealt with privatisation for the last 30 years. There is a need to change. Maybe not the change that the Tories want, because their kind of change was just tearing up people's T's and C's. If we want to reflect
terms and conditions,
if we want to reflect a modern railway, then let's have the conversation about it, because sometimes a lot of this is just used as a bit of a smokescreen for unfinished business for them or other areas that they quite fancy changing. Hence the reason, the weirdness that we were talking about walking. We'd got the General Secretary, me as the Assistant General Secretary, and the President of the Executive, and we spent a whole day talking about walking times specifically on South West trains or South West Railways. And really, is that the best use of everyone's time?
Talking to whom about?
Well, this was the RDG.
This was RDG.
Oh yeah,
right.
this was stuff they were very unhappy about.
Okay, so without a commitment to further negotiation, I mean, is there not an issue there that we're just going to get back into dispute territory?
No, I don't think so. I think part of the problem is the way that the Conservatives went in to start the talks and talk about modernisation, which was to go in, do as you're told, tuck your forelock, and we all think you're massively overpaid. We're not going to give you any money. We're not going to talk to you. We're going to impose. Well, there's always going to be a response that's not going to end well when you start going down that road. Whereas if you say, well, we've identified we need to make these changes to the railway, and we need to bring people along with. We're going to have to restructure the railway in a different way. Quite frankly, no one really knows what GBR is going to look like. And what's the point? We're really going to get cart and horses the wrong way around. If we start restructuring, then we've got a completely different railway. What are they going to do? Go down a sectorised view? Or are we going to run sort of TOC 2.0 or what?
We have no idea.
No,
I mean, I don't have any idea.
And neither do we. And I suspect neither do they.
So, when you say the railway does need, you agree there's some reforms. I mean, would that include, for example, no longer having special Sundays, but kind of incorporating that into the workplace across the board.
No, that's it. We don't have special Sundays. It's a 7-day railway. It's a 7-day week.
Right.
It's slightly ridiculous that we've only run Monday to Saturday. And this is a hang-up from BR. They always relied on Sundays as overtime.
Right.
Now, some companies in privatisation, we negotiated that we'll have Sundays in the working week. Right. We'll have a 7-day railway. We will have, a standard working week with Sundays included.
Right.
So Sundays are not overtime. They know the resources they've got and the resources that they can apply to run a railway. Absolutely sensible. We've got that on South West Railways, we've got that on South Eastern, there's a number of the companies that have got Sundays in the working week, that's just my experience. However, to do that, you need more train drivers. Then the private companies decided, this is, we don't like this because we're going to have to pay for more train drivers, because if you're running over 7 days, you need 7 days worth of train drivers. If you're going to run over 6 days and then do the 7th on overtime, then you only need 6 days worth of train drivers, but rely on the overtime.
Right.
Problem is then, is when you're relying on overtime, people say, well, I don't have to work overtime because by its nature, it's overtime. I'm only going to work the time. Right. And then suddenly they go, oh, hang on, we can't resource the Sundays. Well, they either want a 7-day railway,
right,
and they have to resource a 7-day railway. That's, they're doing, again, classic private companies, they're doing it on the cheap. And overtime is always cheaper than employing the correct number of drivers. Since the early 90s, ASLEF has had a policy to end rest day working, this institutionalised overtime. However, it's cheaper to rely on overtime than it is to employ the correct number of train drivers.
Because you don't have to give them holidays.
You don't have to pay pensions, you don't have to pay national insurance, you don't have to give them holidays, basic stuff. You don't have to buy them uniforms. If they're not there, and more importantly, you don't have to train them, which is quite a cost.
Right.
So if you can run 100% of the railway, and I'm including Sundays in it, on 75% of the drivers, that's 25% profit for them.
Right.
Then it all comes slightly unstuck when the relationships break down and people just say, I don't want to do any overtime, they're not obliged.
Which is an increasing phenomenon because people want to spend more time with their families.
Absolutely.
And they get paid quite well, so they don't.
There is a certain amount of slack, I suppose. But there is also that the railway is a really intensive job and it takes its toll.
Right.
And if you make a mistake, you tend to lose your job,
right,
or you'd be taken off driving. So you'd lose that nice salary, as you
right,
say. So a lot of drivers just want to reduce the amount of pressure that they're under. Whether it's high-speed express trains, or actually I always found more stressful was the metro type work, because that's really
you're stopping and starting.
It's really intensive work, and in some cases on the southern. Well, I was a Brighton driver. You'd be able to see the tail lights of the train ahead of you. You're running at that level. You can see the train ahead of you. So that's really, really intense. And I know, and I've been off driving for a couple of years now. I know it's got more intense in the last 5 or 10 years or so.
Okay, and there was no attempt to negotiate any of that with the incoming Labour government. I mean, would that not have been a chance for Labour to say, right, let's really, sort this out well and good for years to come. Let's sort out these T's and C's.
The problem is for those changes.
Yeah.
They're kind of very long-term negotiations, and they're going to be different in each of the companies, because the companies all have different operating needs. They already have different terms and conditions. Some companies have Sundays inside the working week, some companies don't, using Sundays as an example. Others have slightly different rostering arrangements, because the long distance intercity companies have slightly different rostering needs to the metro companies. Well, the dispute wasn't going to go away while we were having these negotiations. So I think they did exactly the right thing when we said, clean deal, get it sorted, then let's take stock of what we want the railway to look like, and let's start the negotiations on that.
I mean, there was criticism from the Tories, and not only the Tories, that the government gave away this pay rise and didn't extract anything out of it.
They got a railway that was no longer on its knees and no longer embroiled in the longest dispute that the railways had seen.
Right.
And we were still getting 90 odd % yes votes in the ballots. We were hitting all the thresholds time and time again. We had defeated their minimum service levels. That was the silver bullet. That was part of the reason the Tories didn't negotiate, because they thought by taking the drivers' right to strike away, they would bring us to our knees.
That was the requirement, that the operators would have to run 30 or 40% of the trains in any case, even when there was a strike. And you managed to actually not prevent that from being implemented.
Yes.
And how did you do that? By
Well, one of the companies, LNER, came to us and said, right, we're going to implement these minimum service levels. Southeastern also did, saying we're going to implement minimum service levels, and we said, yeah, fine. Part of the regulations were there need to be consultation meetings where we defined how this was going to operate. And the moment they put the formal meeting in the diary, we gave them 5 days strike. Continuous, because if we're only going to have 40%, if our action is only going to have 40% or 60% efficiency, they're going to get a lot more seat. Basically, they won the speedboat, and we said, well, you know, we're happy to talk about your MSLs. Other problem with the regulations are really poorly written. You'll be unsurprised to hear.
right.
And it was more about the Daily Mail, something must be done, than how you're going to apply this in real terms.
Because it's very difficult to force people to work.
Well, no, actually, the law was very clear.
Right.
If you had been given a work notice, you were obliged to come to work, whether you had taken part in the strike ballot or not. You were obliged to come to work, and the union had to tell you to come to work. So we had to tell our members to cross our own picket lines. So the moral aspect of that is neither here nor there.
Right.
The practical aspect of them having people to come in and work. These people are going to be under a lot of pressure. They've just passed all their colleagues on a picket line to come to work, but they're only got their contracted hours. So if you're a 7-hour turn and you're identified to work, they've got to cover 40% of the railway with a bit of a hodgepodge of turns. They would basically need 90% of the drivers that would have been booked on to come in and cover 40% of the trains. So we could quite happily put 5-10 days strike on. We're only running 40% of the railway, but 70, 80, 90% of us are getting paid. And
they hadn't really thought it out.
We are dealing with the Conservative government here, and hadn't really thought it through, has been a theme since about 2016.
Right, okay. So, happier times now, you've seen that off.
After that MSLs, the first effort was in April.
Right.
And then they tried again in May, but none of the TOCs were taking it. They just said, no, we know this isn't.
The TOCs themselves didn't want to do it.
None of them.
Right.
They were
because LNER, of course, was a state-owned TOC.
Yes.
Right.
I think a lot of the operator of last resort train operators were under a lot of pressure by the government to implement minimum service levels, and they all said this just does not work. It's completely impractical. We're going to put more action on, because as we said right at the beginning on the consultation on minimum service levels, was this will just toxify relationships. Our relationship with LNER isn't magnificent still, and it was also, you'd get more strike action.
You did then have a subsequent dispute with LNER, which was then resolved.
Yes.
And what was that about?
It's just the way they had failed to implement any agreements. Now, we kind of get on a strike day, all bets are off. But this was between the strike days. They were just taking drivers off turns. They weren't abiding any of the agreements. The relationships from the management had become really antagonistic and toxic. And that then caused further problems. And after the resolution of the national pay dispute, there was still unfinished business with one or two of the other operators, LNER being one of them, who got some additional strike dates, which then we subsequently resolved through the DfT.
So now, happier days. Do you see a railway now that is going to have fewer disputes? And I mean, there's already some issues about tube strikes, but I mean, do you see? There's always a worry that a union is going to take advantage of a Labour government. That they're kind of seen as soft on unions, and therefore you're going to push hard. can you say that that's not going to happen? Or
Well, I'll never say never that it's going to happen, because it still happened under the Labour government of 97, 2010.
Right.
But they were far, far fewer. We've had more strike dates with Tory governments than we have with Labour governments.
Historically.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
not even since privatisation. Let's
Right.
make it that
Right.
historic.
Right.
Since 1993, there have been more strike dates with Tory governments than there have been with Labour governments.
Right. So you do envisage a piece where a kind of period where there's going to be fewer disputes, where there will be better relations.
Yes, no.
Even though there are some hard decisions.
There's going to be some really, really tough decisions, and this is going to be tough decisions for the railway and tough decisions for us. And I think there's going to be problems elsewhere. I mean, at the moment, the public realm has
What are the tough decisions that need to be made?
part of it is we don't really know what the decisions are going to have to be,
Right.
because we don't know what the railway's going to look
We're
like.
back to that issue. Yes. Yes. Do you think that GBR is going to be one big TOC, and therefore you should have all the same conditions?
I'm not entirely sure how that's going to be done.
Right.
But bear in mind, British Rail
Had several divisions.
whilst the driver's hourly rate
Yeah.
was the same
Yeah.
from Land's End to John O'Groats,
Yeah.
the pay was very, very different. So I was a relatively senior driver at Brighton, so whenever I went down the iron stairs and drove a train, I was on mileage, I was on DOO, I was earning significantly more than the driver in Link 6 or Link 5 who was doing West Worthing shuttles, where I'm doing Bedfords and back, and he's doing West Worthing shuttles. He's on flat money. So there was a real disparity in earnings. If you look at the King's Cross men,
Right.
would have been, or the King's Cross drivers would have been, or they were on contract mileage, they were on a significantly higher money. Compare that to the South Wales valleys, where they were on flat money. So there were very identifiable stratas of pay and terms and conditions across the country. They were different in different locations. So even under BR, earnings and conditions that were available were different even within depots. Brighton, my old depot under BR would have been my link would have been paid much higher than all the other links in, because I was relatively senior.
Right. So we can't envisage that all being unified.
But we're going to have to look at some form of harmonisation of terms and conditions. But whenever we've had the discussion with the Conservatives, they talk about harmonising down.
Right.
Where we need to say, well, these are what the salaries are. How do you want to operate? Because a lot of the negotiations that we've had in the past have all been about outstanding bugbears or little hobby horses. Certainly the DFT, as I said,
The Strawberry Hill.
And Philip Hammond being completely exercised by the fact that a train driver gets paid from going from one end of the train to the other. And as we said at the time, unless they've come up with some Star Trek technology that gets us magically from one end of the train to the other, we are still going to need to walk from one end of the train to the other. And even, it was cited in the Telegraph, which amused a lot of us, which was that we get paid for walking to the train from the mess room at Victoria, and we all know it's only a couple of minutes, said the Telegraph. Well, I challenge anyone to walk from the mess rooms, which were kind of pretty much opposite platform 10, to the 12-car mark on platform 19, because that's where we're going to have to go to, in a couple of minutes. It takes about 7 minutes to walk the length of a train, let alone from the mess rooms. And anyway, they've got themselves in such a tears about walking times. They've all been done over the years with stopwatches, and if they could be any lower, the railway management would have got them lower.
Right.
They are what they are.
So
they're absolutely obsessed.
So your advice to the Labour government is what then over this?
Well, come up with a real clear set of what you want to achieve. Right? A lot of them come in with how they want to achieve things, rather than let's talk about what do you actually want to achieve, and let's see how we can achieve it. If they want a 7-day railway, okay, you're going to have to resource it for a 7-day railway. If you just want to do it on the cheap, that's a different story altogether.
Right.
And that's going to have to be the discussion.
Okay, that's a great point to end it on. Thank you very much, Simon.
That was a fascinating interview, Christian. What are your main takeaways from your discussion with Simon Weller?
Well, I thought it's a very interesting history, and I think it was very informative. But one thing really struck was that when the Labour government got in, they completely bypassed the rail delivery group, and that's basically the employers who had been negotiating through Steve Montgomery, boss of First Group, and they were completely sidelined. And so basically, it became a direct discussion between senior people in the DFT and the ASLEF, completely ignoring the private sector in it. And I think that gives away the lie that the Tories had kind of put out the whole time. Oh, that it was nothing to do with them, Gov. It's a just dispute between the private sector and the private operators, and they're trying to extract all this productivity deal, and we're not involved in this. And of course, we all knew that was a fiction, but it was proved to be so. And I think the other thing is that it does leave open the question as to the future and what will happen when some of these deals, which we discussed, need to be gone through. Like over Sunday working in some companies, over the fact that there's big differentials between the various companies. There's a lot of difficult negotiations to come, and one can see that the new Labour government absolutely has to be on top of that and realize what it's trying to do. And of course, we don't really know what's going to happen with the role of Great British Railways. Are they going to conduct these negotiations? Who's going to be on the table on the other side this time? So lots of questions, I think, but also I do think there's an important bit of history there.
Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, this time I've really got a thought from the Departure Lounge. I came across the fact that American airlines have apparently devised a form of boarding card, which when you present to the desk as you get on the plane, if you are in the wrong group, if you're not in the right priority section, it will actually beep and you'll get sent back to the end of the queue and have to board with the group that you've actually been allocated. But it strikes me this whole thing is madness. I mean, who cares about when they board the plane? Because they're all going off to the same place, coincidentally. But also, there's an obvious solution to this. Here's Christian Wolmar's solution to boarding planes, which I think certainly Ryanair, but certainly every other airline should learn, which is why not board the people who have got window seats first and just put them all in the line so that you'd no longer be treading over the people in their aisle seats to get to your window seat when you're one of the last to be boarded. Why haven't they thought of this, and why don't they do it? And of course, if you are with somebody with a window seat, you'd obviously go on the plane with them. But it would seem to me that given that Ryanair and EasyJet and all those people are so intent on getting their turnarounds very fast, why haven't they thought of this? Maybe one of our listeners will be able to explain.
Calling All Stations, the transport podcast with Christian Wolmar, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do also follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle is @AllStationsPod.